when I was the chair of the CP-SRC. So when just we got to just requested Soumyadeep, why don't we start book discussion? He agreed immediately, and also we started to go with his own contribution to this book. So thanks for this academic department as well for having this. So I warm welcome all of you to have the first discussion in IAPSS under the CP-SRC Students Research Committee. So I'm happy to be a moderator here to moderate the sessions as well as to invite our speakers. The speakers are very important and very significant academic contributions are there. So I'd like to just read their short bio because I seen the bios are very big. So I don't want to waste our time. So I just want to go with a short introduction of our both the speakers and discussion of the session. So I just want to read it. The speaker of the day, Mr. Soumyadeep Chowdhury, is a young scholar and academic administrator in political science, currently serving as an academic assistant professor at Adams University, Kolkata, and is noted as the youngest lecturer at the institution. He also holds a research affiliations with Yale University and University of Pennsylvania Institute for Advanced Studies of India. Besides serving as the vice president and a director of academic at the International Association for Political Science Students, IPSA, sorry, Canada. So also he also have a double gold medalist in the political science from the Xavier College of Kolkata. He is among the few native wide of qualify for the both UGC JRF and assistant professorship in 2024. His research focuses on the Indian Constitution, democracy, political comparative politics in South Asia. Also, he is a recipient of the acquiring the Indian fellowships around worth of 12 lakhs in 2025. And also, he is a research granted around 1.5 lakhs in 2024 under the uh, University of Pennsylvania Institute of Advanced Studies of India. So also his works features in Sage, Routledge, and Springer publications. Or he has more publications that. Also an active con- uh, conference presenter, editor, and political consultant, Soumyadeep combines the academic rigorous with the leadership in the students' governance and remains deeply committed to the advancing global political scholarship. Welcome, Soumyadeep Chowdhury, for the day to have your discussion on here. Also, let me introduce the second speaker, the discussant of today, discussing about the book chapter by Mr. Alan David. Alan David Simon is the postgraduate student pursuing MA Political Science at Xavier College of Calcutta, Autonomous University of Calcutta. As an inspiring research scholar, currently engaged as a fellow at the Pihelli Pedi Fellow Program, June to September 2025. The future of Indian foundations. He graduated as a with BA Honors Political Science from the ST Service College of Kolkata in 2024, and also has been a researcher with the Students Research Committee under the International Association for Political Science Students since. He is a commenter on the post-colonial political culture. Also, he is an active member in the IAPSS for all the volunteer work for us to conduct this kind of the first initiative lectureships. So whenever we need a volunteer for speakers or whenever we need a volunteer for uh, some other academic supporter, so without hesitation, he used to show his hand to us to help us. So with this kind note, I welcome Alan David also to participate in today's lecture. So without wasting our time, so I welcome Soumyadeep to take your floor, please. The floor is on yours.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on whichever part of the world you are joining us from here. So, greetings of the day. Thank you, Tirupati, for the generous introduction. I'm really thankful to you for Firstly, consenting to moderate this session and also for taking the initiative in launching this kind of a book discussion session, which I am sure will set another landmark in the academic history of the International Association for Political Science Students. So thank you so much for both the initiative and also for taking the lead in moderating this discussion. I'm also thankful to the current chair of CP-SRC, Alicia, for introducing the moderator and for welcoming every one of us on board. So thank you, everyone. Firstly, to one of everyone present here, today is a great day when, of course, I get to speak about my work, which has been recently published with Springer International. But it's also a welcome respite from me because most of the meetings, most of the sessions that I do at the International Association for Political Science Students nowadays are mostly administrative meetings. So that comes as a welcome respite for me because going beyond administration, I also get my chance to interact with scholars, with students, with academics of all levels to actually engage with my work and give me some critical feedback on how I can improve my scholarship for the time ahead. So it's going to be an academic deliberation after a long period of time, and I hope to make the best out of it. I also thank Mr. Alan David Simon, who has joined us as a reviewer, as a discussant for the session, and I look forward to his critical comments, questions at the end of the session. And also from all of you, I see the number has already climbed 22, which is a significant number for any SRC session at any moment. So with that small note of introduction, thank you once again for welcoming me, and let's start. Okay. So the book that we are going to discuss today, I have it in hand with me right now. It's called Business Strategies and Public Policies in India and Europe. It's published by Springer International. The editors are Dr. Vidisha Banerjee and Dr. Sheetal Sharma. Uh, Dr. Banerjee comes from the Amity Institute of Public Policy, while Dr. Sheetal Sharma is an academic who is currently working at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. This book, as we know, is basically a compilation, is a combination of multiple chapters, multiple works. And what makes this book so very interesting is that it does not just talk about public policies in one particular country, but rather in India and also Europe, which we understand is the combination of multiple countries. Europe is a continent. So we talk of diverse policies. The book will be divided into three main segments. One talks about policy theory, about the various kinds of policy theories, and also how scholars, how academics, how professionals and practitioners, because policy again is not just a matter to be studied, but it's also a great matter of implementation and how we get things on board. So, of course, academic and professional perspectives together enrich our understanding of how we see public policy as a discipline. So, the first section of the book largely talks about, focuses on how public policy has emerged, how public policy has progressed as a discipline in the years that have just gone by. The second section of the book actually focuses on a very, very emerging area, a very, very interesting area that is on climate justice, climate action, and the environment. So the ecological policies are ecological frameworks, ecological laws, institutions, so on and so forth. So the second again has a very ecocentric dynamism, and ecological policy, as we know, is becoming more and important as the day is passing by because the climate crisis has become acute, and the Earth is giving us clear signals that we need to mend our ways. And as countries which take a lot of pride in actually implementing effective public policies, I think climate action and environmental policies also need to be at the heart of all that we are doing. And third, this book will also actually discuss a diverse set of policy imperatives, a diverse set of policy perspectives from various countries of Europe as well as from our own country, India. And it is here that I feel that my scholarship, my contribution has made the most impactful presence, wherein I work on the National Education Policy 2020, the NEP 2020, as it is popularly called. The rest of the discussion from here on will, of course, focus on this particular work of mine, NEP 2020, which is a part of this prestigious volume with Springer International. I also extend my thanks to the editors of this book and also to the publishers because it's taken us almost 2 long years to get this done and to get this published. So thanks to their patience and thanks to their resilience and belief that we could make an important contribution. Um, to begin with, before we start with the national education policy, I would request if you could kindly share the screen, Alan, or Tirupati, whoever has the presentation. That will, I think, make things easier for our audience to follow as well.
I hope it's visible.
Um, it is. Can everybody else, can you just put it on full screen?
Yes, it's visible for us, but there's a box on the screen.
Yeah, there is a box on the screen, I think.
Yes, actually, the pop-up message will be visible there. Therefore, because I'm here, right, as a presenter, therefore
All
I'll
right,
be
it's
showing.
it's visible. The title is visible, and I don't think that's obstructing the title. So, we can continue.
Right. Um, yeah. So, hi everyone. The title that I'm going to focus on today is In Pursuit of a New Geopolitics of Education, Reconciling Civilizational Idealism and Globalist Pragmatism in NEP 2020, the National Education Policy. That is the current policy for education that we are following in India currently. Um, Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about such kind of a policy, when we actually get into the discussion, it becomes very, very relevant for us to understand as to why we are undertaking a discussion of this type, right? Why NEP 2020 and not any other kind of policy, and why this discussion in particular. So, as we understand that post the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, when ideological differences began to matter less, the socialist, communist, and liberal dichotomies, they began to be unraveled. And we are currently living in a post-Cold War era epoch wherein ideology has come to be replaced by identity. In other words, the ideological slashes, the ideological cleavages of the left and the right binaries, they have now been replaced by a sort of a civilizational identity, a civilizational clash. And that civilizational clash, that civilizational identity, today is reflected not just in our political narratives, not just in the politics that circumscribe us today, but also in the public policies that we encounter. So, civilizational imprint is very much visible on the public policies of the day, and the National Education Policy 2020 seems no different to me. Herein, I refer to three important scholars, rather three important thinkers, Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, and Louis Althusser. All three of them talk about the role of educational institutions. They all say that it's not just about the substructure. As we know, Marxian theory talks about how the substructure actually influences the superstructure. That is, the inequalities in the distribution of property actually influences how the political institutions work. We must understand that it is actually a combination of the substructure and the superstructure that helps in ideological perpetration or ideological domination. And that is what Gramsci, Althusser, and all the neo Marxists would actually carry forward. And this paper tries to highlight, rather, tries to bring to light how a civilizational identity paradigm also gets reflected and revealed through the NEP, the National Education Policy 2020, that we have. We should not also forget that another important theorist, Michel Foucault, Foucault had talked about how power is knowledge and knowledge is power. So often through our various educational discourses, through our discourses on knowledge, we find how power gets reflected and power relation gets revealed. So what are the power and power relations that the national education policy is talking about? What are the national priorities that it has? And what kind of politics does it reveal is something that will go on to be the main focus point of this session, not only in terms of domestic politics, but also in terms of international politics. Because what I think makes National Education Policy 2020 a unique policy to be chosen is that, of course, it's a domestic public policy. It has implications for India's domestic priorities. But at the same time, when we are trying to emerge as a Vishwa Guru, when India is trying to reclaim its space on the world order as a tutor of the global age, right? At a time when India is trying to show that it has an educational system that is not just competent for its domestic population, but it also internationally competent. This is how it also paves the path for a new geopolitics of education. So the policy has not just domestic implications, but also international implications for our foreign relations and our foreign ties. And this is what we shall consider as to whether the NEP 2020 provides the paradigm, provides the opportunity for a new geopolitics of education to arise out of it. The next slide, please. We live in a country, ladies and gentlemen, where almost 65% of our population is still young. So more than 65% of Indians are today below the age of 35 years. And we have a median age of 29 years, which means that we are a very, very young nation. And given the fact that we are the largest, most populous country in the world, even surpassing China today, it means that we have a positive demographic dividend. We have a large section of the population which is young, which is capable, and which is waiting to be absorbed into the workforce. And as Erasmus said, that the future of any nation depends on its youth. And to understand what the Indian youth is capable of, what the Indian youth can do, understanding the current education policy becomes very important from this perspective. And it is here that we will try and understand as to what are the situational realities, rather, what are the reasons which actually compelled the government of India to look for a new education policy. We know necessity is the mother of all invention. The steam engine was invented because we needed a fast mode of travel. The light bulb was invented because we needed a source of light in darkness. So even every policy for that matter, not just educational policies, are born out of a crisis scenario. So what was the crisis that existed and how does the NEP try to resolve those conflicts? What are the political motivation or the political or the civilizational lineages that continue to influence the National Education Policy 2020? And of course, in conclusion, we shall look into how this provides a paradigm, opens a doorway for a new geopolitics of education to arise. We must also remember that political touches to curriculum, right? Political touches to educational curriculum, to educational discourses are not a new phenomena at all. But rather, right since the time of Indian independence, be it the Indian National Congress government under Jawaharlal Nehru and Mrs. Indira Gandhi, we have seen how RSS related literature and arguments of public order, national security, and integrity have actually led to changes in government curriculum or changes in school and university syllabi. We have seen how under the earlier BJP governments of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the excessively pro-Congress or pro-left content has been deleted. Similarly, in current times also, we see an ideological connotation, an attempt to propel India into a Vishwaguru status, that is of a world tutor, wherein we want to be a world tutor not just by blindly embracing the West, not just by blindly imitating what the West does, but by sticking to our traditional civilizational values, takes for which allow us to take a relook into 2020 NEP and allow us to blur the artificial boundaries between domestic and foreign policy. Next slide, please. The research objectives. So what are the main questions that I've tried to understand and explain from here? First, I've tried to look into, as I discussed, how has situational realities prompted the government to craft this policy? So every policy has a reason for its emergence. So what have been the crises? What have been the problems under the earlier paradigm, and what was the necessity for a new paradigm to be evolved? The second is what are the main features of this policy? Because when we talk of a new policy, it becomes only necessary that we explain, we make our audience aware of as to what are the key tenets of this policy and how this compares with the preceding educational policy, the educational policies that we have been having in India previously. The third talks about what are the civilizational influences or the political inclinations that this policy brings. And the fourth, what are the practical challenges that the policy is likely to face, especially in a time when a brain drain, outflow to foreign universities, and strengthening visa norms actually provides a new scope for innovation and also a new scope for expansion of the education industry. This paper, or rather this work, shall therefore contextualize the NEP within India's larger educational trajectory, trying to compare it with earlier policies and see how, why, and where it exactly fits into India's educational landscape. How the dynamics of civilizational identity actually go on to influence, sometimes even political ideologies such as Hindutva go on to influence the NEP? And what are the pragmatic implications of this policy for a greater collaboration between India and the European Union in general and the European countries in particular? At a time, we are seeing education not just as a tool, as an instrument to make our students competent and capable enough, but also as an ideological weapon to liberate ourselves from the quagmire of Western resistance and Western dominance, thereby reflecting on the possibilities of a new geopolitics being created out of it. Next slide, please. The methodology that I have applied here is basically an interdisciplinary mixed methods case study, where, of course, I will combine a qualitative analysis, that is the content analysis of the draft policy. I've got the draft policy from the NEP 2020 from the Government of India website, and that has been put together with a quantitative analysis of the statistical data that is available from census reports, NSSO reports, and also the Ministry of Education reports, which have allowed me to develop a case study for comparative analysis with previous education policies and also pragmatically consider the challenges, the possibilities in creating a new geopolitics of education, wherein theory and comparative analysis can be blended together for creating a new socio-political phenomena. Next, please. So the discussion will first try to highlight, let me put the discussion into 4 different parts. First is we'll try and see how we can fit the National Education Policy 2020 into the larger framework of educational policies we have seen so far. So what are the educational policies we have seen so far, and what are the pragmatic gaps that the NEP 2020 is trying to plug in? Secondly, we'll try and see how political inclinations or how ideological civilizational tendencies have influenced it. And third, we are going to try and see how a new geopolitics of education can be born out of through the internationalization of education that the NEP promises. So to put into frame very briefly the historical trajectory of education in India, India became a democracy in 1947. And roughly India's first educational policy came around 1948 when we had the uh, Radhakrishnan Commission, which was the University Commission. So India's trajectory of education was, of course, very, very dominantly influenced by the British because, as you might be knowing, that India has been under British rule for more than 200 years, starting with the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Till the time India got independence in 1947, we have had a long period of British rule. And with the coming in of the British, we also saw the coming in of the missionaries, right? The missionaries who have played a very, very important role in the educational landscape of India. And given that India had a colonial government, the English missionary Western education system was very much prevalent in India right since a very early time, perhaps since the colonial era in itself. And in this, the most important contribution is that of Lord Macaulay. The minutes on Indian education, Lord Macaulay, he sought to establish an English education system for the Indian natives. And that tells us about the colonial imprints that the country's educational landscape has even till date. Macaulay's minute, of course, as we know, was basically an instrument to create clerks out of Indians who could actually help in assisting the colonial administration. And with that, English started getting pervaded through the cities and towns of India, and of course became a very, very important medium of language of education soon after. Once India became independent in 1947, one of the important tasks for the Indian government was, of course, to educate the population because India had a very high poverty rate and a low literacy rate. And these were twin ills. Like any other developing country, poverty and illiteracy were two of the main social ills that challenged the India, and therefore the Indian government had to find sustainable solutions to them. So when India began as a new democracy, began as a nascent democracy on the world stage, India's first priorities under the Nehru government was in terms of establishing an educational system that works for India and that works for the Indian population and not that of a colonial master. So when India became independent, right a year after 1948, we have the University Committee, right? One that would talk about how India can develop a super higher educational system where we talk about the IITs and the IIMs, the Indian Institute of Technology, the Indian Institutes of Management, which continue to be some of the most premier institutes of the world today. So the very infrastructure of modern day higher education, the IITs, the IIMs, were all products of the Nehruvian era. And given that India had a plan to grow rapidly in terms of economic growth, they knew that if they had to provide the paradigm for that launch, for ensuring that they would be a high yielding economy, they would need engineers, they would need scientists, they would need people from all backgrounds who could actually provide us with the infrastructure, with the headgear to actually take a big jump economically. So India's efforts, India's attempts to actually establish a paradigm for higher education began much way early on, right since independence. It was only few years later that India got to realize that it was not higher education alone, but rather school education, school level education, which actually made a real difference. Because who would go to the IITs and the IIMs if people did not have even school degrees? And that was exactly the state of India we are looking at. That this is not India today, India in 2025. This is India way back in the 1950s, India in the 1960s, when we have poor literacy rates. Most people do not even have a school degree, let alone the aspiration for higher education. So the government of India gradually realized that higher education is only going to work when people at least have a good education at the school level. And that is when the focus started shifting from higher education to secondary education and ultimately to primary education, because that is where the roots of the education system lie. And it is for the first time in 1968, the Kothari Commission reports focused on universalization of education up to the age of 14 years. That is primarily primary and middle school, classes 1 to 8. And therefore, the focus on training of faculty, ensuring that we don't just have students going to schools, but we have equipped, qualified faculties who are not just educationally higher, but also faculty who actually know how to teach, who are trained to teach. And therefore, formulation of a scheme of a 10 plus 2 plus 3 education system remained at the focus. The Kothari Commission report would later lead to the first national education policy of India in the year 1986. We today talk of NEP 2020. The first national policy of India came in 1986, when education was termed as a unique investment both in the present and the future. And through this National Education Policy of 1986, we framed what was called the National Curriculum Framework. For the first time, all over the country, all across states, there was a uniform curriculum, there was a uniform syllabi that educational institutions had to follow. And this was followed by the Action Plan of 1992, the Plan for Ensuring Infrastructural Education, Operation Blackboard, training teachers training through the Bachelor of Education, Master of Education program, and ensuring that we have an educational system which serves not just students, but also serves the need for career advancement and upgradation of the teachers who are also very much a part of the system. However, no matter the different policies that we have had in India, after this, India actually went to embrace the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Around after 2000s, India advocated for the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which actually talks about universalizing education. And this found its reflection in the act of the RTE Act of 2009-2010, which is the Right to Education Act, which for the first time realized, or rather recognized, right to education as a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution. So this was the India's educational strategy, or rather the history of India's educational landscape since the post-independence years. But no matter the policy that we had undertaken, be it the University Commission, be it the Kothari Commission, be it the National Education Policy of 1986, the Plan of Action, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, or even the Right to Education, there remained some stark gaps. There remained some deficiencies which needed to be filled, which needed to be addressed. Because at the end of the day, if these policies had been very, very successful, very, very effective, then why did we need a new education policy in 2020? Had all the problems already been sorted and they were given the actual results, then why did we need a new education policy? Of course, we did take some leaps, we did take some great policy measures, but they did not yield the result as expected. We talked about universalizing education. We talked about how education should be a right for everybody, but then there remain stark gaps, stark deficiencies in what data shows. Our literacy rate, as data would show from the 1901s, even till 2011, right, which is just around 10 years back, which is when our last census was conducted, it shows that there is a gap of 16 to 0.68 percentage between males and females, which means it's still high double-digit gap. Which means that if our males have, say, around a literacy rate of around 85, 86%, our females are still struggling in the early 70s or the late 60s. There's a significant double-digit gap in education so far as the two genders, that is the males and the females, were concerned. If we look at educational rates in terms of age groups, we'll still find that there is a significant gap because especially uh, literacy was lower comparatively in the older age groups. Of course, this is something we cannot right away address because the right to education is ensured for everybody up to the age of 14 years. But what about those sections of the population who had already crossed the age of 14? So it is through adult literacy programs, through adult education programs, that this section of the population could be catered to. So first, female literacy remained significantly lower in India and continues to remain lower in India even today. The older age groups have continued to remain less literate as compared to the younger age groups. These are two important demographic trends that we see in the India of today. Next, we'll also see, can you please go to the next slide? Next, we will also see that there is a great regional divide. We have almost 29 states in India, but not all states in India have the same kind of literacy. We have states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and other states in the south and also in the northeast. Mizoram becoming one of the latest states to get a 100% literacy rate. We see that many states, such as Rajasthan, such as Bihar, they continue to lag behind in the educational rates. And it's a stark difference. If it's almost like it's a over 90% educational literacy rate for Kerala and other states, while it's just 55% for states like Jammu Kashmir, for Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which are very, very popular states in India. On the same hand, just like women have a lower literacy rate, the older age groups have a lower literacy rate. Even the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribe voters, they are one of the most backward and also one of the most exploited groups in India, also have a significantly lower literacy. And there too, the gap is almost double that of the general population. So no matter how much we talk about universalizing education, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, these are some evident gaps that have remained in the educational landscape of India today. Gaps in terms of regional gaps, caste-based gaps, gender-based inequalities, and also inequalities in terms of age groups and the place. Of course, the urban areas, the posh city metropolitan areas have had a much higher educational literacy rate as compared to our rural towns and our rural villages. Please, can we go to the next? So what remains very much evident is that no matter the efforts taken on part of the government, our gaps in the educational system have continued to remain very, very stark and very, very significant. So in this perspective, we can understand the NEP 2020 was very much a need of the hour, and the NEP 2020 as a new policy initiative tried to address at least some of these gaps and try to remedy India's educational system for the larger good. So what are the features, rather what are the key tenets of India's educational policy 2020? NEP 2020, for the first time, talks about early childhood care and education. So far, our education system has focused on higher education, secondary education, and primary education. But scientific reports show that 85% of brain development in children takes place before the age of 6 years. And so this is a very, very critical age. The early childhood care and education play a very important role for brain development if that child has to undergo primary, tertiary, and secondary education very, very successfully. So the NEP 2020 has actually tried to embrace a multifaceted and a multi-level pedagogical activities. With NCRT frameworks which provide for early childhood care and education, the ECCE at the Anganwadi centers, which would provide for emotional as well as socio-educational development. Second, the NEP 2020 changed the very structure of the Indian education system. Unlike the earlier 10+2 system, that is now replaced by a 5+3+3+4 model, wherein 5 years of pre-primary education, 3 years of primary education, 3 years of upper primary education, and 4 years of secondary education with a single board examination after class 12. And moreover, it tried to ensure that there is a multidisciplinary, holistic approach to education. Indian education for a long period of time has been known for stringent differences between the natural sciences and the social sciences. So the NEP 2020 tries to transcend these boundaries. It tries to ensure that we take a multidisciplinary approach to education. We give more flexibility to students in terms of choice of courses, in terms of ensuring that our undergraduate courses are also professionalized. They give our students not just book-based rote learning, but also allow our students to get internship opportunities, to get research grounding, to also get experiential learning, which has become a very important part so far as NEP 2020 is concerned. And of course, ensure that our PhD courses, our research work is more innovation driven, is more rigorous, and it actually meets the everyday needs of humankind. And this, of course, talks about the need for teacher training and development. Because it's not just the students who are performing in the educational system, the teacher needs to perform as well. The teachers at the educational institutions, be it the school, colleges, or the university levels, they are the guru. The Guru Shishya tradition, as we know in the Indian education system, is trying to be relived through the NEP 2020, wherein through professional training, through professional competence, the teacher is somebody who is able to adjust himself to the technological advances that the country and the world has seen, and therefore try to make the classroom a very, very inclusive and a very, very accommodating environment. Because the students come from different backgrounds. They have various social diversity. They have various plus points and minus points. They have different needs, different aspirations, different problems. So a one size fits all jacket does not really suit classrooms in India. It's difficult because we have large class strengths of around 50, 60, or even 70 students in many of the classrooms in government schools, colleges, and universities. But yet, that there has been an effort that is made to ensure that the teacher is able to accommodate and is able to be inclusive in terms of catering to the students and the demand. But in doing so, in harping on these important features, where do we actually fall back on? What is the guiding philosophy and the guiding maxims for these features of the National Education Policy 2020? The National Education Policy 2020, the draft document that I find on the Ministry of Education website, Government of India, clearly states that the rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge has been a guiding light for this policy. Therefore, the NEP 2020, which has often been criticized as going back, as being regressive of policy, is often something which takes pride in actually going back to India's roots, in going back to India's ancient and eternal Indian knowledge system. And this has been a guiding light for this policy through and through. Next slide, please. It is here that we will try and see as to how a civilizational paradigm has been at the very heart of the NEP 2020 model, wherein it tries to propagate a civilizational pedagogy which will offer a new construction of the post-colonial state in India. Of course, a part of this is derived from the Hindutva ideology of the current government in power, because just like we said, content and curriculum in India has never been apolitical totally. We have seen both under the Congress and the left, and also under the BJP government's curriculum has seen a change with the change of government. And so, what are the changes that the NEP 2020 tries to bring in, and how is it linked to the civilizational paradigm that the BJP and the ruling administration in India tries to promote? So, going by the works of Narayan, Anderson, and Estrada from the University of Oxford, I talk about civilizational idealism that is very much reflected in the NEP 2020. The civilizational idealism that is reflected in NEP 2020 talks about going back to India's past. It has been said that educational policy in India 2020 goes back to the past. And of course, it admits it itself that from Nalanda to Takshashila, to Shushruta to Aryabhatta to Baharamira, the ancient Indian universities, Nalanda and Takshashila, to the various scholars in India, Shushruta in surgery, Aryabhatta and Baharamira in mathematics, the Guru Shishya relationship is something that is very, very exalted in India. And the NEP 2020 tries to recreate this Guru Shishya tradition and also tries to re-invoke India's civilizational past and India's civilizational glory and give India an educational system which is not Western. It's definitely modern, but not Western, but rather suited to India's needs and India's origins. Next slide, please. It tries to ensure a strong nationalist overtone to the entire policy, wherein there is a mention of an Indian citizen sticking to the country's constitutional values, being aware of one's fundamental rights and also one's fundamental duties. You cannot just claim to have rights as a citizen. You also need to be dutiful as a citizen. And for that, you need to be conscious of your own role and your responsibilities in ensuring a changing world and a changing country. And therefore, the NEP 2020 wants everybody to take deep pride in being an Indian, not just in thought, but in spirit, intellect, and deeds, and develop the knowledge, the skills, the values that is also required for a sustainable global order. A global citizen who can actually erase the lingering colonial hangover, getting out of the British colonial education system and embracing an educational system that is truly Indian in every sense of the word. The third feature that the NEP 2020, rather the third maxim or guiding philosophy of the NEP 2020 talks about the sexuality and otherization of the non-Aryan, wherein it has tried to drop everything that has actually dependent or claimed to be non-Aryan in terms of the various deletion of chapters on the Mughal era, the removal of the anti-Muslim antecedent attached to the Gujarat riots, and even higher officials like the former Vice President of India, Venkaiah Naidu, talking about how it is very much the need of the hour to go back to our ancient religious texts, including the Vedas, the Gita, and many of them are also being taught today as part of school and college curriculum. So the curriculum in itself, NEP 2020 itself, makes it clear in every possible term that we need to go back to our roots and we need to reclaim our civilizational identity, not just within the country, but also outside. And of course, this is one of the most gender sensitive policies so far as India has seen in terms of mobilization of women, which talks about how statism, the state's recognition of various socio-economic communities and trying to accommodate them, especially the disadvantaged ones, trying to accommodate the images of the Devi and the Durga together to ensure that there is a proactive mobilization of women so far as education is concerned. And here, mobilization would, of course, mean opportunities for empowerment, opportunities for jobs, opportunities for scholarships that would actually ensure that the male and the female would be brought on the same platform so far as modern India's educational trajectory is concerned. Next, we'll try and see how the assimilationist agenda has been something that is very, very prominent in the NEP 2020, wherein it tries to break caste boundaries, artificial caste boundaries, and tries to ensure that all underrepresented groups, especially the gender biases, the social biases, and the regional gaps in education are also bridged. No matter the policy after the NEP 2020, we have also seen various flagship programs of the government of India, like the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao initiative. We have seen that the NEP 2020 is also a policy which talks about the rights of the disabled children. There have been a lot of guidelines under the NEP wherein there have been talks of ensuring that campuses are made wheelchair accessible, especially for those who are differently abled. That the teacher and the administrators be qualified in the art of teaching autistic children because they have different needs, different educational requirements, and we need classrooms which are not just efficient in terms of providing quality education, but also education which is accessible and inclusive at the same time. And that is what reflects the spirit of Antodaya, which, as Deen Dayal Upadhyay says, is the spirit of reaching out to the last man in the line. And that is what has been echoed to the NEP 2020 and assimilationist agenda of inclusiveness, of quality education for one and all. And finally, what we also see through this policy is by invoking Foucault, Gramsci, and Huntington, whom we have already talked about as theorists, as thinkers at the very beginning of the presentation, is that we are talking about an educational system where the private sector has a very, very important role to play. We live in a world where there is a PPP model consistently being invoked. PPP model in terms of a public-private sector collaboration. And here, the public-private sector collaboration is in terms of both not just the state providing education to the government institutions, but also private educational institutions, institutions not just in India, but also abroad, collaborating and coming together to ensure a qualitative educational system which meets the needs of modern India. And as A.G. Nurani claims, that being a Vishwa Guru is not just about ensuring that we have a competent educational system within the boundaries of India, but also an educational system which is respected, which is something that will actually help India reclaim its spot on the global order. And that exactly shows why the NEP 2020 is such a significant public policy in India, which has both domestic implications and also foreign policy implications. A policy which shows us, or rather exposes, clear linkages between economic and foreign affairs, and this itself necessitates an interdisciplinary approach to this study. Next, please. Nevertheless, the NEP 2020 has also been overtaken by multiple criticisms, multiple shortcomings and limitations. There is a language debate wherein there has been a call by multiple states, especially from the south of India, that it's basically a call to impose certain languages on people who don't speak their languages. Political agenda has been a major concern. Opposition parties have alleged that the Bharatiya Janata Party and the ruling government in India is trying to impose its political agenda, which is why they have called that the NEP 2020 is a Sanskritized policy. It's a Hinduized philosophy of education. And of course, there remain pragmatic challenges in terms of funding, which is a major concern for any educational institution, not just in India, but also in the world. Infrastructural capacity to keep up with the modern needs, equipments, and necessities that the educational system demands today. And of course, bridging the gap between what it promises and what it delivers, between the promise and between the performance, which has been a Herculean task, because to plan, to come up with grand agendas is just one part. But to implement them in practice, to ensure that we actually deliver what we promise, is certainly a very, very difficult task. And that itself talks about the SDG 4, the Sustainable Development Fourth Goal, as part of Vision 2020, wherein ensuring inclusive and educational quality education shall ensure promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. And this calls for going beyond the domestic borders to ensure that international collaborations and partnerships also become very, very important in India's educational sector. Next, please. This is where we'll try to move on and go beyond the domestic concerns of India's NEP. We have already looked at what are the major features, what are the major tenets, and how they are all influenced by a civilizational idealism paradigm, and of course, to a certain extent, by political agenda of the ruling government, to now see how this NEP 2020 can actually provide for a new geopolitics of education. Firstly, NEP 2020 says, and the main point of my argument in this book is, in order to develop a competent educational policy, we do not need to be imitative of the West. We do not need to blindly embrace what other countries are doing, what modern Western countries are doing. We can be important by sticking to our roots, by coming up with an educational policy that is unique and that suits India's educational interest and India's national interest as such. So our strength is not in imitation, but our strength remains in terms of remaining resilient and remaining unique in terms of what we demand. And secondly, we are actually operating in a world, a globalized world, of course, which none can deny. We are operating in a world wherein we are seeing that there are a lot of troubles so far as the educational academia is connected. With the coming in of Donald Trump in the United States of America, we're seeing how visa restrictions, how various other impositions on students, especially the work rights after education, the various bans and restrictions on getting part-time jobs for students in foreign countries is increasingly becoming a problem for many, many of the students. And Europe also has remained not a very attractive destination because the high cost of education in Europe, barring Germany and some other Scandinavian countries, of course, where the government has sponsored the tuition fee, costing has remained a very, very important concern in Europe, especially in countries like the United Kingdom, where scholarship opportunities are becoming all the more rare. And at the same time, the excessive focus of the educational policies in Europe on the market logic of ensuring profitability and employability has also remained some of their key challenges. So while we understand that in India are one of our primary challenges in terms of educated unemployment, we often educate our youth, but we fail to provide them with skills that will make them employable. This is something that NEP 2020 tries to address through professional opportunities, through internships, through experiential learning, through skill-based and competency-based education. But at the same time, it talks of a global collaboration. It talks of an international collaboration wherein we work not just within the country, not just with governments within the country, but also with international think tanks and international universities to develop a truly global curriculum. So while we in India can talk of a curriculum that is actually enriched by our local roots, by our local philosophy, by our standards of a rich civilizational paradigm, the Europe And European Union can, of course, teach us about the standards of an educational policy, which is really rich in terms of providing competency and also employability. So we both have something to take from one another. We both can take a cue from each other's strategy. While Europe and the West can learn from India's civilizational strategy, civilizational paradigm, at the same time, India can also take a cue from the employability and from the world-class curriculum that the West, particularly the European Union and the European countries, have to offer. Next slide, please. And this tells us that ideationally, it is the rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian thought about the pursuit of knowledge, Janan, wisdom, Pragya, and truth, Satya, which are the highest human goals. And therefore, this shall remain the driving force behind this policy, both in spirit and in letter. And this clearly is manifested in the various principles and the proposals of this policy, as we have seen while undergoing. And it is with the support of comparative advantage, because while the European Union can support us with funds, technology transfer, India can actually offer a cultural niche which can transform our individual weaknesses into our mutual strengths. And that can make NEP 2020 a mutually beneficial project for one and all, which opens the doors today for multiple foreign collaborations and therefore can actually help India realize its strategy of becoming a global future, of emerging as a true Vishwaguru. And today, right from the White House to the very corridors of the household, education is a really, really discussed subject matter. Even today, the recent visit of the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has seen the proposal for setting up of 9 new UK industries in India. Previously, top universities in the US and also from many other European Union countries have set up proposals to start their campuses in India to ensure that their minds, their equipment, their educational policies can come and help the Indian youth at a time India is craving for modernization, but modernization while sticking to its traditional roots. And India's NEP 2020 is perhaps one of the most classic and latest examples of this. Next, please. So finally, the recommendation would be that we work towards a world where we work towards a world of education wherein we have not a merely imitation of the West, but a dematerialized, rather an Indianized version of the education system. But we try and remain aware of the ideological, rather the political influences that our educational system has. The best educational system is perhaps one that is not completely imitative of the West, but it is realizable of the roots of India, the aspirations of India, and one where there is multi-level actor and multi-level sector collaboration between the central government and the state governments, between the governmental actors and the non-governmental actors, and between national, subnational, and international actors. And therefore, the ability to reconcile between our idealism, our civilizational glory and culture that we derive from the past, and of course, the pragmatic needs, the needs for employability, the needs for professional competence, wherein we are able to prepare the youth of today for the future of tomorrow and ensure that the NEP 2020 can actually deliver on that goal, on that promise of a reinvigorated educational system which caters to the changing necessities and the vibrant aspirations of a new evolving India of the 21st century. And therefore, ensure that we work today with the promise of a better tomorrow and make the India and the world a better place to live in through a transformed educational ecosystem. With this, I end my presentation and I remain open to comments from the discussion and also from questions from each one of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumyadeep, bringing all these aspects of the NEP 2020, including the challenges and criticism in India and outside India, how the scholars looking. So we'll open up the question and sessions later after listening from our discussion part from Alan David. So that would be sufficient, I guess. We can go for it. I hope the Alan will bring some more discussion on it, the critical fever analysis and exam manner. So I'm expecting from you. Go ahead, Alan, please.
Greetings of the hour, everyone. I hope I'm audible clearly. And it's a very impressive presentation that Professor Soumyadeep Chowdhury brings before us, especially in terms of how we see the shifting demands of the labor market being equipped and better equipped with challenges presented to education policies around the world, especially in the global south, which has infrastructural limitations. And of course, it also has a population crunch where you have an enormously large population, and compared to that, the educational infrastructure is either minimal or overstressed in these political systems. And so I think it's very interesting how the book presents a comparative study of both European systems reacting to these labor market challenges, as well as that of the Indian system reacting with policies of its own. And the midway that the Indian policymakers have gone for, where they have tried to blend, as Professor Soumyadeep points out, globalist pragmatism, looking at the changing demands of a globalized economy, and an economy that is no longer simply industrial, it's post-industrial, it's also a knowledge-based economy, and it's moving towards the post-knowledge-based economy with artificial intelligence taking its own roots into every form of production and mechanization. And therefore, we see this interesting blend playing a very intriguing part of how politics in India shall be determined, at least for the next decade or so. And the remaking of education policy, as pointed out in the article, very specifically with three separate theories from Karl Marx's instrumental and structural theories on how education influences society as substructure, and then Gramsci's reinterpretation of how substructure determines the superstructure, and of course the economic impact of education policy and the educational institutions across the world. And finally, of course, Althusser's very interesting potential of ideological states using educational institutions, especially non-coercive institutions, to create ideological base for electoral success, as well as perpetuation of the present living order. And so the theoretical basis of that article not only provides us a good uh, good framework of looking at educational policies and educational institutes as large, but also gives us a way of looking into how educational institutes and policies are responsive towards both the superstructure, the economic conditions itself, and also how the substructure is also determined by the power systems that evolve over time, and how the article goes on to present from the colonial times, from the minute that presented an entire colonial system, how the entire clerical bureaucratic system of India was created under the colonial education regime, and thereafter the 1947 independence, and the Nehruvian way of going for higher education, and then a backward rotation towards secondary, and then finally towards primary education, and now towards child development to begin with, has been a pretty much of a backslide on its own, where we haven't begun from the bottom layers of education itself, rather begun from the highest level of education and then trickled it down to the lowest form. And so NEP does do an interesting, and the article does do a very interesting job of explaining how that backward turn has at times been has presented a hindrance to a larger educated society, a larger literate population, and as well as how the education system has always been used for ideologically furthering the electoral goals of the present governments and their political ideologies. And so, educational institutions uh, as an ideological base for an economy also presents us a very different types of questions and queries. And I think the research work does a great example of setting out macro tendencies that we see at large from the NEP, as well as how the NEP has been implemented. It's certainly the theoretical framework that it provides us, the historical trajectory that it founds itself in, and also how it places itself in the political arena, and how the NEP, despite being a policy, is also politically driven, ideologically driven, and certainly not subtle about it in certain ways. And so I think one of the best questions that can be asked of this research would be, we see instances where funding has been diverted from more traditional, more Western scientific thoughts towards sciences that are more indigenous, including Ayurveda, but that has also included funding of journals that are either completely or at least leaning towards Hindutva ideology, and also towards practices that had at least being considered to be outside of either medical or scientific proof. And so, how far does that go till we start considering, these tendencies of an ideologically framed education policy to be a hindrance to academic freedoms or even academic choices by academicians? And so that would be a question that may be something that the article can take further on. And I believe that Professor Soumyadeep is already very invested in taking this research forward. So that might be something that can be suggestive of how where foundations of freedom might be endangered when the limits of ideology and when the limits of educational institutions barring on academic freedom goes into it. And also the greater question of how civilization in India is getting reinterpreted. A tendency towards the past is one thing, a tendency towards glorification of a past that was certainly something indigenous, but not certainly something that was uniformly the best. Would also be a question of how we can go ahead and look into those forms and policies and the impact that has on a larger audience where civilization, India as an idea is getting recreated. Perhaps something more ethnographic can bring out the turns of how there has been a recreation of the idea of India itself away from just political ideology, but creating an entire generation of Indians who would rather not look at the idea of India in any longer post-colonial terms, but possibly in civilizational terms, more as Bharat than as India. And that would be an interesting, trend. Not only an interesting trend, but also a very interesting shift in how, civilizational, countries, especially claimants to civilizational states, have behaved in the past. Are there comparisons that can be taken from civilizational claimants like that of China, maybe that of Russia, even maybe that of the United States of America, and how these states have also used their educational systems and educational policies to make a shift in the entire idea of what nationhood is, the entire idea of going beyond the nation state into that of a civilizational state. And that could be a comparative study that can be promoted, especially through the research article that was and the book chapter that was written by Professor Soumyadeep. And these can be a great number of future courses of action to take, especially from this study, as it goes on to give us a very interesting balance that has been maintained in the NEP and points it out very directly as to having that global pragmatist view of looking into emerging economies and how to respond to them very well, while at the same time creating an idealism about a civilizational past, which has its own queries, certainly has its own limitations on to where it becomes hindrance to academic freedom, and also if it is a comparable to how civilizational states, especially claimants to civilizational states, tend to shift from a discourse of nation state, from a discourse of post-coloniality to that of a idealized past. I would say that these are questions that can certainly be taken, and also I think one of the criticisms that Professor Soumyadeep takes up is that of the imposition of language. So has there been a move away from English and then into Hindi? And in which case, one language or the other is getting supremacy over the other? And how does that respond to maybe regionalism, maybe federalism at the same time? And of course, the back and forth movements that India has seen in terms of linguistic movements is also something that can be predictive. Would there be linguistic movements that would be prompted by the NEP? Is there enough amount of leeway for states to determine their language policy specifically to their context? I think that would be something that I think is already expanded in the book chapter, but can also be expanded by the speaker if he so wants to. And so these are, possible research questions as well as research arenas that I think that this chapter prompts us to look into, and ideas that it does indulge in, beyond just making a commentary on how the NEP is a well-balanced policy as well as its criticism at the same time. I think that is it from my end, and I think the moderator can take it into a question and an answer session. Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting discussion and interesting review on the chapter by Alan David. Actually, I had also had some few questions. You also raised the same question, so I don't want to repeat those questions. But again, so I just want to summarize the chapter, the presentation, which is by done by our Soumyadeep, today's speaker. So actually, it is the summary of the talk is today. Like we skipped the colonial era and we went to the ancient period of India, our ancient period of education system, our ancient period of the settlement system in the human settlement system in India. So it's all question to me how we were in the ancient period. The question was that whether we all inclusive or some certain of the communities are excluded from the education system, particularly so-called the NAP saying, as you have mentioned the slide also, it is that Hindutva idealistic taking forward basis on this. So this, while listening this, just raised a question to me. When we skipped this, the benefits of the colonial period, particularly on educational benefits, we are all here to gather and discuss about the education system, policy, welfare, governance, and so on, world politics, national politics, and regional politics, language, cultural, so on. So these all is came up to my mind while listening this. So the book is also the chapter is covered completely depending on the NEP report, which is published by the government of India, and it's available in the website. Also, you can go and read by for the further questions. Apart from this, so the methodology followed is really good, and also the objective framed by the Soumyadeep is really great, and also the found the gaps as well as the followed the challenges, which is completely what you quoted, the language issues and the cultural issues are so a question. But my question is that why did you miss to address the way of implementation of NEP in this country? The countries follow the federal setup, and the NEP is called the education policy or education subject is called in the concurrent list. When the concurrent list is having, it need to be addressed with the regional governments, right? So, but the implementation of the NEP, which is criticized under the challenges I'm meaning it. So many states are said, as you mentioned, the data, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, which is having the more achievement in the education system. These states are opposing this education policy, isn't it? So they're saying it, the way of implementation is not correct. That's what they're meaning it. So why they didn't consider before bringing this idea or the policy towards as a nation policy? That's my question is towards you. Why don't you miss to address this? If you could address this one, it might be the fulfill the paper, and you might show that you are like standing the proper way of the democracy, the basis on the constitution. The constitution also says education system must be the followed by the scientific temper. My question is also here: are this NEP 2020 is following the scientific temper method or not? If it is it, how we can connect with the ancient period to contemporary modern period? It's question. So how we can go for the scientific way of research in the ancient period when we are not believe or when we are not followed the scientific method in those era? So that's my questions to you. So basically, apart from this gap, otherwise your data and sorry, I didn't get the full time to read your entire chapter, but I just gone through your chapter. Therefore, I just after gone through and listening here for discussions, presentation, I could raise this. Also, you brought many thinkers. Also, you brought many social organizations, the contribution towards the education policy implementations into the ground level, how we are today. So how the Congress government was given effort to educate us to be a citizen of India, being a dignity life, and also how the social organizations, so-called RSS, having contributed and through the so many institutions in India. So whether not a matter what type of education they taught, like curriculum education or the scientific method or some other method of the education system they follows. I have also questions about the curriculum method. How many communities or how many sectors of the people can access the curriculum education system in ancient period, even if we are going for the upcoming the year in the future of India education system, how many communities or how many sectors of the community people can access the curriculum education system is a question to me. It's raised to me. Actually, I'm just putting towards to you as well. So you brought it, the vision of 2030. It's really great. We need to be stand with as an Indian, no doubt in that. We need to have a separate education system for us. There is no doubt. But the Constitution says the inclusive method of the education system, inclusive method of the language, diversity of the cultural activities matter in India, right? That's what the framers of the Constitution is suggested and strongly believed to follow us as an educational system in India. So Macaulay system is completely helped us to understand who we are, where we are, under which institutions, under which government policies or rules and regulations we are living, and what type of method of education system we have to adapt, how we can connect with the other part of the world, right? So in that way, so how do you contribute? How do you counter this way? NEP is supporting particular an ideology or particular agenda for political parties or some organizations. So how are you going to stand with as a government under the Constitution of India when the Constitution of India is saying that it must be the democratic way of implementations with the concern of the all the states, with the concern of all the people. I know that how this NEP team came to the other states and how they had interactions with the people, how many suggestions they received. It's all matters. So it is you missed out these all the gaps. That's what I'm meaning it here. So apart from this, also the Alan brought it many consecutive questions on this. Apart from this, stating that India unity, showing the India as a Bharat, insist of India as a nation or India as a country followed by the multi and diversity language and cultural activities, and having India as a subcontinent of the South Asia. So this way, how we are going to address when you're going for the Bharat, why not also India? Why this constitute? I mean, why NEPs support to this way? When because when you have the opposition ideas in the state or in the country, how we are going to address this? You could have say in the elaborative way that will be good for this presentation would be that. So with these questions, with this summary of the talk, so I'm just opening the floor to have a questions. So, maybe if you have a question answer to this, my questions, you can answer. Also, you can gather the questions from the other members. We can go over. Dear audience, please feel free to raise your the questions. And if you're not able to unmute your mic, please type it in the chat box. I can read it for you. Thank you.
I think we can address the questions that were, put forth by Alan and Tirupati, and after that we can open the call for other members as well. As I think, Tirupati in detail asked us asked the speaker a lot of questions, and I think most of us are awaiting to hear answers to those questions first. So can we go ahead with Alan and Tirupati's questions?
Yeah, sure. I think
Speaker can take call for, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that will also give the audience some time to think on their questions. Yeah. So meanwhile, let me try and answer them. Okay. So this actually reminds me of two great works in political science. Okay. So Benedict Anderson, he writes, "Nation is an imagined community," right? And Partha Chatterjee writes, "Whose imagined community?" So I think, how do we propel imagination? Right? Our imagination, to a great extent, comes from our idea, right? Our educational system. We think what we are. Our educational system makes us into what we are. So for the first time when India thought about NEP 2020, the very question that India raised was, whose imagined community, whose imagined educational system are we trying to follow? So the government of India's claim was, we are not going to imitate a British colonial system. True, we cannot deny that we have been a colonial country. We have been ruled by the British for 200 long years, which is a historical matter of the fact. But that is not how we see ourselves. So whose imagined community are we? Our imagination, therefore, is not a post-colonial one. Our imagination is therefore about trying to re-invoke the glorious civilizational past that India at one point in time has had. That is the time the human settlements, the civilizations, the empires that Tirupati, Allen, and all of us have mentioned in the talk below. So that was the government's imagination of how we want to look at ourselves as citizens, and so far as our educational system is concerned. Were we not really scientific? I don't think there are clear answers to this, but science, I think, has its roots in India because many of the ancient scientists, Vara, Meera, Aryabhatta, were all from India. So science does have its roots in India. So to say that ancient Indian education was not entirely scientific is also would be an understatement. So science has had its origins in India, and the West also recognizes the contributions of India to science. So the civilizational contributions that Bharat had made to science is also very, very evident. To say that India's ancient education was not scientific would therefore be a misstatement as well. Now, the same question today is also raised by the opposition party and many of the states. If the government of India wants to imagine its identity as an ancient civilizational state, then what about the identity of the other groups? What about the identity of the other communities? Because we know that the current ruling party and the administration and the regime in India is riveted to a particular ideology. So does it leave out, as the question says, does it leave out the other identities? So that again is the question of an idea. What we must try and understand is this text is largely an ideational text. It talks about ideas, it talks about contestation of ideas. So community, imagination, and who's imagined community, right? These are the conflicts, these are the clashes that this text continuously tries to look at. And that is when I refer to as whether it's about the imposition of Hindi, not really, because the NEP 2020, if we read the document, right, let's go beyond political narrative and analyze very objectively what the document says. The document, of course, tries to move beyond English because it believes that that's a part of our colonial legacy. It tries to promote not just Hindi, but also 22 other regional languages. That is the official languages which are enumerated in the Constitution of India. It even talks about starting universities in regional languages. I think we don't have central universities in regional languages. We have state universities in regional languages, but we don't have central universities. I think it also emphasizes on the need for Sanskrit because Sanskrit has been an ancient language. So it talks about a Sanskrit university, right? Because we don't have any Sanskrit university at present. So the focus is not just on Hindi in particular, but Sanskrit and various other official languages, including the many tribal languages that have seen constitutional recognition. So again, the idea here is not just about the kind of state that we are trying to build, but about being very, very civilizational in terms of giving recognition to the various languages that have actually defined modern India's educational landscape. So this is why I would restrict myself to an ideational identity, because I think implementation, as Tirupati mentions very rightly, is a completely different domain, right? When we're talking about ideas, it's very difficult to actually get into the implementation because that's a practical side. Of course, the title of the work itself says civilizational idealism and globalist pragmatism. So our pragmatism is mainly on the globalist side. Within the country, we are trying to deliberate on ideas of who we are, right? And how our educational system should be. Like we referred to Althusser, we referred to Gramsci. We talked about how education can actually propel ahead an identity of a citizen and therefore the propagation of an ideology, much like China and Russia have done. They have promoted a spirit of nationalism, tried to mold citizens into a kind of mold that they wanted. Similarly, in India, there are efforts to do that. And at the same time, if we talk about the implementation, let me be very clear. NEP 2020 has just come in 5 years back. So we are just 5 years into the policy. And for such a policy of this scale, 5 years is, to be honest, 5 years is not fair to give a judgment on the practical applications. I think a policy of this sort should at least be in operation for 10 years or 15 years to give us a really realistic idea of how this has performed. We are just at the beginning of NEP 2020. All implementation, all negotiations, all collaborations are just at the very advent of it. It's a beginning, it's not the end. So I think it is only 5 years from now or 10 years from now that both of us or every one of us in the audience will also be able to make a better judgment of how things have been in the future. So I think implementation is therefore a thought for the future, and definitely I'll take into account the comments of the reviewers in terms of taking this up as a future work. But again, the focus, the central idea of this work has remained on identity and whose identity and how the educational system, the educational ecosystem is trying to propel this forward. And of course, while it provides a strong theoretical framework drawing from some of the Western scholars, at the same time, it has also touched a tapestry of themes, right? It has touched on regional politics, it has touched on party politics, government and opposition, it has touched on international relations, and also tried to show how India should stick to its civilizational identity at the domestic level, so far as formulation of policies is concerned. But at the international level, our priority should not be just imitating the West, because our strength lies in not embracing somebody else's policy, but by being who we are and standing to our very own point. I think that is what the essence of this work means, and that is what this policy is about. Of course, there are practical fallacies, but I think that is something that we should leave for the later timing, because it's only with time that we realize whether this policy has come up. Because it was after 1986, it was a gap of almost 25 years that we had a new education policy. So probably if we need another new educational policy, we would need perhaps another decade or so to realize where the real fault lines are. So we must give it some more time to see what are the real concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, you could address about the curriculum education system, how it will be effective if the education policy is implemented.
Yeah, so what I try to answer is like, see, when we're talking about an ancient Indian educational system, we're talking about scholars like Paramita, Aryabhatta, we're talking about various ancient universities in India, like Takshashila, like Nalanda, so on and so forth. So they followed a different tapestry of education, that is the Gurukulam system, right? Wherein the student and the teacher would live as a community. That is the kind of educational system that we are looking at. Because when we are talking about inclusivity, right? When we are talking about how students from various backgrounds should be catered to, right? When we are talking about how differently able students should be catered to, right? It means that we as a community have to be inclusive. It's not just a professional mode of education wherein we come, we deliver a lecture, and we go away. We need to be empathetic. And for empathy to develop, we need to identify ourselves as a community. Again, the question of who we are, right? And that again is very important to developing our system of education. Of course, there is privatization, because when we are going for international collaboration, there are so many private enterprises, so many international organizations which are interested in contributing to India, modern India's educational tapestry. But at the same time, we need to be aware that it is this community identity, like thinking of the teacher and the student as a community, not in that traditional sense of the term, but at an ideational level. It is the idea of a community, right? That education is not just about individuals, it is a collective. It is how we see each other and how we relate to each other that could actually define the essence of educational system in India to come. And that, I think, to a certain extent also remedies the fears about inclusivity and exclusion that we have been talking and debating so far about.
Okay, thank you. The audience, you can raise a question. So meanwhile, I can just state some of the states are started to invents a new education policies for the state. Like Tamil Nadu started to introduce the first time in history as a new education policy. After comes NEP 2020. So our NEP 2020 is stimulating us to focus many roads. So how we can go strongly towards the federal system, and what way we can go for it, and futuristic followed by all the scientific way. So please, audience, you can raise the questions. Yeah, please, Alisha.
Yes, so I have actually a few questions. Professor Soumyadeep Chowdhury, had spoken about how NEP 2020 is a rather ambitious policy for India today, and also mentioned that there are various questions regarding how NEP is getting implemented and will be implemented in the near future, given that it's a nascent policy. It's only been in effect for the last 5 years, and also, I think Tirupati had also raised that education is in the concurrent list. Right. So, does NEP talk about how the union and the states will partner when it comes to implementing the policies of the NEP? And how do you think the NEP will address challenges of implementation when it comes to funding? Like Alan had mentioned that there's a diversion of funding as well. So, how do you think NEP will tackle these implementation challenges when it comes to funding and when it comes to infrastructural deficiencies in our educational institutions? So does NEP talk about those in the policy document? Are those mentioned in any particular way, also in any particular manner? Also, I think another question that I want to raise is that you've spoken about how the NEP emphasizes more focus on Indian languages in the education system, and because it's claiming that English is a colonial vestige, if I'm not wrong. English has given a lot of advantage to Indians today. The knowledge and the fluency that we have in English, it's taught to be, it's considered to have, unlocked various opportunities for Indians everywhere in the IT sector, when, it has given employment to Indians in MNCs as well. Also, today that we are present in IAPS, we're able to discuss because of our fluency and our knowledge of the English language. And even English today has become a linking language for Indians within India as well, where somebody like Tirupati is from Tamil Nadu, I'm from West Bengal. We're able to discuss with each other because we know this linking language that is English. And also, India's service sector again dominates our economy, and English plays a very important role. Our fluency in English makes us more employable there. So, how do you think this very decentering of English from our education system, do you think that this will rob our students from important opportunities that you and I can avail at the moment? So these are my two questions. So if you could answer them.
Hi, thank you for the questions. Yeah, so far as education is concerned, it's indeed a matter in the concurrent list so far as the Indian Constitution goes. So, in other words, both the center and the state have co-equal authority when it comes to framing of educational policies. But then again, the concurrent list also says that in case of a clash, the policy of the center would prevail over the states. Now, if we look at the tapestry of the trajectory rather of the various educational policies that we have had in the country, 86 or earlier, most important initiatives in the education sector have come from the center. The states have played a role in terms of implementing them or in terms of rolling them on the ground. Now, it's not just the state, remember, it's also the local administration who has to come into play, rather, even the educational institution, because when you give a new course of subjects, right, it is not just the state government. It is the college principal or the school principal, together with the faculty, who will actually have to apply that on the ground. They know what are the concerns, right? They know how to implement it best in their institution. It is the district education officer in collaboration with the heads of the institution of that particular district who will implement that particular policy. So it's much beyond the state government. So it's not just a federal issue between the center and the states. It goes much beyond. It talks about local government. It talks about local administration, even the institutional level administration, faculty, and the students. So right from the top, think tanks, governments, central governments, right to the grassroots, that is the educational institutions, students, and faculty have to be involved in this process. And that's why I say that its implementation will take time and it's just the beginning. So it's like policy of a huge scope, policy of a huge scale. So it will take us some time to make a more justified or make more fair analysis of how the implementation has gone so far, because it's still a very, very ongoing process. So that would be my first answer to the federal issues. And of course, states have the right to go ahead. But I was just a few weeks back, I was listening to an India TV conclave. So it was being attended by the education minister of the state of Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh, like we know, is another non-Hindi speaking state in India. And Andhra Pradesh's education minister, Nara Lokesh, was talking about how Andhra Pradesh has had a history of multiple languages in the border places. Like Telugu is the main language of the people of Andhra, but in the borders, right, where it shares borders with Odisha, with say Karnataka, it actually also offers papers in Kannada and offers papers in Odisha. Because it knows in the border regions, there's already a multilingual cohesion that exists. So multilingual cohesion has already always been there in India. So it's not a new model. So what we need to understand is when we are talking about languages, we are not trying to replace one language. We are trying to highlight the importance of multiple regional languages. We're trying to promote regional languages. English is already promoted. We have no doubt that English is an important language and it's been an official language for communication for decades. But at the same time, today the government of India is also talking about foreign languages. With French, Spanish, these have also become very, very important part of the policy because if today I need to get an internationalized education, I need to know a foreign language apart from English. Because that makes me more employable in the global think tanks, in the global services, and that makes me a world citizen at the same time. French, Spanish, German, or so on and so forth. So it's not just English, it's a lot of foreign languages, and at the same time, regional languages as well. Remember, if I know something that somebody else already knows, or rather, most of the people already knows, that does not make me special or that does not make me employable. Because the other person already has that skill. And so if there is an oversaturation of a particular skill, unemployment is very, very problem. So only if I have something beyond what the majority has, then only am I special, then only can I be actually employed in sectors which others cannot be employed in. And that is why foreign language is today important, to get into those sectors of the world economy where our participation is still low. Therefore, we need to know regional languages, which we have so far neglected because that can actually help us get into sectors and jobs and therefore become more employable citizens. So employability, competency is not just does not lie in just following global trends, but also in doing things unique and doing things differently than what others do. And I think that is also something the NEP 2020 has actually tried to cater to. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Professor Soumyadeep.
Any others? So I think there's no one. I think every others are clear. So no doubt in this. Thank you so much, Soumyadeep, bringing such a thought-provoking lecture on your contribution without any taking side or answering to all the questions. So though we have multiple questions on our implementation process and adopting by the state governments on the policy, but still hope as an Indian will go for the better future without forwarding or without against the Indian Constitution, which says about inclusive method, so scientific temper way. So hope that our education system will help us to grow inclusive method without exclusion method or excluding format. Anyway, thank you so much for this wonderful thought on your chapter and on your scholarship of the and also I must thank to Alan David given very wonderful review on the chapter from the comparison between the India and European policies, how the Indian education system is and how the Europe and USA policies are inclusive or civilian basis rather than the identity basis. So that is also very important. And for this wonderful. And also, I convey my thanks to our chair, Alisa, for allowing us to be conducting this first book discussion in the IAPSS this year under the theme. So thank you so much also to the IAPSS allowing us to have a discussion on such a kind of work, which is hereafter it will take continuously, I hope, and also Soumyadeep is VP of AP department, academic department. I hope he will also support us. I think there is one more question. Christopher? Please go ahead. You can unmute.
Oh, please confirm you can hear me.
Yeah, you can. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I've just been really observing, and it's been a very insightful conversation. Well done to Professor. Mine is not really a question; it's just a contribution. So, from what we've had today, I could see similarities between the education system in India and also Nigeria. There are a lot of similarities, and I think it still boils down to colonial history. I don't think there's no way you're going to talk about where both countries are, whether Nigeria or India is, without looking at the colonial creation of those states. So well done. I really had a great time. Yeah. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Christopher, for your views on the discussion today. So, with this note, I just wind up my duty as a moderator. I'm just going to hand over to the chair. Alicia can just take over of the vote of flying spot. Thank you so much. And thank you, Soumyadeep.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of our book talk today. I'm really thankful to Soumyadeep Chowdhury for his wonderful and very insightful discussion with us, and also to Alan David Simon for raising really pertinent questions about the entire discussion, and to Tirupati P, our moderator for today. Tirupati took the initiative of organizing today's book talk during his tenure as chair. So thank you so much, Tirupati, for that. He also raised certain questions about this entire discussion that led to a wonderful discussion with our speaker once again. So thank you, Tirupati, for that. Also to members of our audience, thank you so much for joining today's discussion. I think we've all learned a lot from today's discussion. And I think if any of you want to raise other questions, after this discussion, you can always reach out to our speaker for today, Soumyadeep Chowdhury, via mail. He'll be Soumyadeep Chowdhury, if you could send your mail in the chat box, I think it'll be easier for members to reach out to you.
It shows, can you enable the chat? It shows disabled to me.
Okay, can the host enable the chat, Tirupati or Alan? Soumyadeep Chowdhury is also the vice president of IAPS. So you can go to the IAPS website and you can avail his email as well. And he'll get back to you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this wonderful discussion. Have a nice day ahead. Thank you very much.
You try now, Soumyadeep?
Yes. 1 second. Just give me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sent.
Yeah. So the email in the chat box, you can note down and you can mail him anytime. So he will reply. So thank you. Thank you, Alicia. We can wind up now. Please stop the record.